Welcome. Today we're going to discuss what brachot we make when we eat cereal. However, the halachot we will learn don't just apply to cereal, they apply to all foods that are prepared in the same way. We will be focusing on three types of foods. First, those foods which contain one or more of the 5 grains. Second, those made primarily of fruits and vegetables such as corn. And finally, those that contain rice. The basic rules are: first, for foods which contain the 5 grains, if the grains are raw or unprocessed, we make a borei pri ha'adama before eating them. However, if they are processed, we make a borei minei mezonot. When it comes to foods whose ingredients grew in the ground, if they are raw or unprocessed, we make a borei pri ha'adama before eating them. However, if they are processed, we say a bracha of shahakol niyeh b'dvaro. Finally, when it comes to foods made of rice, if the rice is raw or unprocessed, we make a borei pri ha'adama before eating them. However, if they are processed, we make a borei minei mezonot. Therefore, the key issue for us to understand is what is considered processed. Let's begin by discussing the foods made of grain. In halacha, we speak of the chameshet minei dagan, the 5 types of grain. They include wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. Now, we are going to discuss 5 ways foods are prepared using these grains. First, the Shulchan Aruch says, chameshet minei dagan, sheshlakan och tashan, v'asa mehem tavshil, mivarech alav borei minei mezonot, ulebasof ala michya. Foods made of the 5 species of grain. If one divided the kernels or ground them, we say borei minei mezonot before eating, and ala michya after eating. This is because if the grain has been divided or ground, the food is considered processed, so we say mezonot and ala michya. Now, the second case that we'll discuss. Achal dagan chai, o asoy klayot, o shaluk vargarinin shlemim, ein mavarech ela borei pri ha'adama, u'acharav borei nefashot. If one eats grain that is either raw or parched, or cooked but the kernels are still whole, he should make a borei pri ha'adama before and a borei nefashot after. We see that as long as the grain is intact, whether it is raw, puffed, or baked, it is considered unprocessed. So we say ha'adama and borei nefashot. The question is, what about foods that are in between? To better understand this question, we need to learn about the parts of a wheat stalk. If you see here in this picture, the stalk is made of a bunch of kernels that are held in chaff. The chaff attaches the kernels to the stalk. When the chaff is removed, we see that the kernel has 3 parts. The main part is the endosperm. This makes up our white flour. Next is the bran. This is a small volume of the kernel. Bran is found in whole wheat flour. Next is the germ. The germ is also found in whole wheat flour. So, on cereals such as these, we make a borei pri ha'adama because all 3 parts of the wheat kernel are kept intact. And we learned before that if the kernel is left intact, even if it is baked or cooked, the grain is considered unprocessed, and unprocessed grain gets a ha'adama. Now, sometimes wheat is pearled. It is somewhat unclear whether pearling is considered processing or not. Pearling involves removing the bran from the kernel, but the rest of the kernel remains pretty much intact. So, on the one hand, the bran has been removed, but on the other, the rest of the kernel has not been separated or ground. The Mishnah Berurah holds that either a borei minei mezonot or a borei pri ha'adama are acceptable in such a situation. However, he does recommend saying borei nefashot afterwards. Therefore, if having cereals such as these, we would say either mezonot or ha'adama before and borei nefashot afterwards. Now, we come to our 4th case, what we call ma'aseh kedera. The Mishnah Berurah explains that even if the kernels are completely intact, but are prepared in a way that they stick together, this is indeed considered processed. Therefore, we would say borei minei mezonot before and ala michya after. The 5th case is where the grain flour is used as a binding agent to help hold the food together, but not to give it taste or to make it more filling. In such a case, the flour is considered insignificant for bracha purposes, and in such a case, we would make the bracha of the main ingredient. So, let's review. The bracha we make depends on whether the grains, vegetables, or rice we are using is considered processed. There are chameshet minei dagan, 5 grains: wheat, barley, rye, spelt, and oats. If the food contains the 5 grains, and the grains have been processed, the bracha is mizonot. If the grains are unprocessed, the bracha is ha'adama. Grain that is eaten raw or puffed, but intact, is considered unprocessed, and the bracha is ha'adama. When the grain is split or ground into flour, it is considered processed, and the bracha is mizonot. If the grain is pearled and otherwise left intact, it is unclear whether it is considered processed. Therefore, mizonot or ha'adama are acceptable. If kernels are combined to form a unit called a ma'aseh kedera, it is considered as if they have been processed, and the bracha is mizonot. Finally, if the flour is only serving as a binding agent, it is insignificant for the purposes of bracha rishona. Be'ezrat Hashem, the halachot concerning cereals made of rice or corn will be covered in another shiur. It was a pleasure learning with you today. Let's do it again soon.